Well guys, I'm spending some hours here just being stuck in Vim. I used it because I thought it would increase my productivity, but now I cannot exit anymore. Let's see what Stack Overflow says about this. Oh, okay, interesting. And then colon, and then Q. Okay, let me try that. That doesn't work. Oh, okay, maybe try the Q with this one. Yeah, okay, it worked. I managed to exit Vim. I think now I'm a professional Vim user. That experience actually left me so scarred and traumatized that I'm not gonna use Vim anymore. Well, but it's really useful. So what actually happened is I learned Vim, but not using Vim in the command line. Instead, I'm just using it in vscode, and I think that is more or less the best way to go forward. I'm really glad that I learned Vim. It has a steep learning curve, but it's well worth it. It's maybe comparable to learning a few basic keyboard shortcuts. The difference being that as a software developer or programmer, you have to code or work with text all the time. It's really important. And Vim allows you that greater flexibility that you really need. So is learning Vim worth the investment? You could argue against it because learning Vim is so much that you have to learn and you have to install a lot of plugins for the command line editor Vim. You have to do all these different things, and then things will still break and be really cumbersome. So you will probably spend hours and days on your Vim setup. Well, is that really worth it for some marginal productivity improvement? Well, here's the key point about this question. There's a distinction. There are Vim key bindings and there's the Vim editor itself. And most of these things that I talked in a negative light about just now, they're about the Vim editor. You miss all the important features that an IDE will provide you with easily. Instead, you have to know about these features. You have to know their name, sort of, and then you have to Google how to get this in Vim, and then there will be different solutions with trade-offs. You have to install them, it will not work. You have to debug why it doesn't work. You have to come up with custom key bindings just to use those. So it's overall pretty much a pain. However, when it comes to the Vim key bindings, it's so much worth it, and you should not even think about it. You should just force yourself for maybe an hour or two to get used to them. Once you then know the basic Vim key bindings, you can then look what other key bindings are there and then slowly expand and learn. But the basics, they're really easy to learn. You just have to get the muscle memory in for them. So I would recommend that you use a text editor. I use VS Code, and I recommend using VS Code with the Vim key bindings. I've heard that the JetBrains editors, they also have excellent Vim key bindings, because some editors, they don't really have good Vim key bindings, so they might not work, or there might be some blind spot. And one such example in VS Code would be the macros. Macros seem like a really useful feature in Vim, but in VS Code I cannot really use them because they just inconsistently, they don't really work, they break. So there will be some limitations on using Vim with VS Code, but surprisingly also a lot of things work, like starting or creating a new file with the :e and then the file name. It will work surprisingly well in something like VS Code. Overall though, you should easily get by with the key bindings, and you still will have all the amazing features that VS Code offers you, some of which I have really not found any sort of replacement in Vim. And that is also something, if you really want to use the Vim editor, you have to readjust your thinking to and your muscle memory to the way things work in Vim. For example, there's not really text scrolling, so it's most programmers, they scroll a lot when they look through code and analyze code. It's a very natural thing to do. And in Vim, you only have Control D and U for down and up, and you just learn how to step through the code instead of scrolling. That's one example, but obviously with VS Code, you skip all this stuff. So with that said, there's also a lot of ways you can enhance your VS Code experience. There are some little tips and tricks I'm gonna share with you now. One problem, for example, is that when you copy paste things in Vim, when you copy something and you paste it over something else, it will override your buffer, or the thing that holds the copy pasted thing. And that way, if you copy something and you want to replace it in 5 different places in your code, you can search for the piece, go through the code and replace it, but every time you have to copy it again, which is really annoying. And there is a way you can circumvent that. Another huge saver is S motion, where you press the S button and then you press whatever letter you're looking for, and it will highlight them all on your screen. And then you just keep pressing the keys and the cursor then will appear there. Massively useful once you get used to this. One thing I really enjoyed in the Vim editor is abbreviations. You can set that to letters like CO for console.log. You just set CO and then you write the rest, console.log in this case, and you just have to type it and it immediately pops up it immediately will do the thing for you. I couldn't really find something in VS Code until I discovered snippets, so you can create your own custom code snippets, and they work very similar. It's a bit more cumbersome because you have to wait for a small pop-up to appear and then you have to select them, but it's a really nice thing that I would recommend using. Something that's extremely useful is GD. It stands for Global Definition, I think, and you can jump to the definition of a function or variable. I use it all the time to dig deeper. In VS Code, this especially works well with JavaScript, so it's very handy. I use it all the time to go deeper into something, to go into a function and to go into the function this and that function and so on and so forth. In other languages, this might not work as well, like Ruby and Rails, it didn't really work so well. And this leads me to a general problem I had. So once I used GD to go deeper into a function, going back is really vital. It's a really vital workflow of a developer to go, basically in a browser, you can go click on a link, and then you can press the back button on the browser, and then you're back. But in the code editors, this is not really a thing, and it's really strange because it's so useful. There's like a cursor history, but it doesn't really, this feature is like kind of doesn't really work, and I think it was more so in Sublime Text, which I use when doesn't matter. And so what you have left in Vim is Control O and I. I'm not so sure. O is, I think I is forward, and what you don't really need, and O is going backwards. So this kind of is exactly this feature. However, I found that it consistently works much better in the Vim editor. In VS Code, it's quite buggy, and I'm not sure, it behaves so inconsistently. I never really looked up how it works, but it just doesn't really work the way you would want it to work. But this would be, generally speaking, a really nice general developer workflow thing that is really lacking, I find, is to go back and forth. That ability would be so nice, and I haven't found it yet. I've been using Vim for some years, 3-4 years or something, and I've pretty much learned most of the normal key bindings. I don't even use all of them, but I use quite a few. I would say it's massively worth it to learn the key bindings. I had a couple of phases in my life where I used the Vim editor, but yeah, never really stuck with me because there's always cumbersome problems. Here, actually, one of the killer VS Code features that I'm using is the global search. You can search for something and it will just give you all the places in your code where this showed up, and it's massively helpful if you wanna. I use it all the time to see how syntax is used in the code base or what patterns are used if something is used somewhere. So this is a massively helpful feature that is really not at all in Vim. There's some weird substitutes, but none of them are as strong as the VS Code feature. And then another weird odd thing with Vim is that having good syntax highlighting is such a pain to set up in Vim, and it doesn't even really work. Only a few of the sort of keywords will function, but then sadly, if you compare it to VS Code, it's much more colorful, meaning a lot of the sort of variables or functional syntax units, they're not being colored appropriately. That said, if you can make it work, if you can make the Vim editor work for you, it's definitely it can be a really massive help to you. And so it might be worth it. It's a thing to debate though. Let me know how you're using Vim and what you think about using Vim in the code editor, and about all these silly nuances that you run into when you try to marry a coding editor with Vim. Maybe you even know some really nice advanced VS Code Vim tips, so please feel free to share them. Well, thanks for watching this video. I hope it was really useful to you. Have a great, nice day. Bye.